Welcome to LexiMind, where we benefit from books and learn new words.
Welcome to LexiMind, where we benefit from books and learn new words.
So today we are taking a deep dive into Stephen Guise's book, Elastic Habits. And the core premise hits you immediately with a rather sharp, almost jarring paradox.
Well, it really does.
Yeah. He argues that the most effective way to build an unbreakable lifelong habit is to deliberately give yourself permission to do almost nothing whenever you feel like it.
Finally, a productivity system that actually accommodates my profound, deeply seated desire to be occasionally lazy.
Right.
But, without the crushing weight of feeling like a total failure, I can construct an entire, respectable lifestyle around the explicit permission to do almost nothing.
Well, we're going to unpack exactly how that works because there is rigorous logic behind it. Our explicit mission for this deep dive is to dissect why your current, highly structured productivity systems are likely failing.
Yeah, and failing hard for most of us.
For sure. And we'll look at how applying the actual physical properties of elasticity to our daily routines can cure that endless, exhausting cycle of burnout and guilt. Guise builds this argument systematically, starting in the first chapter with a fundamental observation about the nature of human existence.
Okay, lay it on me.
He argues that human life is inherently fluid. Our energy levels, our blood sugar, our moods.
The external demands on our schedule.
Exactly. They shift constantly and unpredictably. Yet 99% of the goal strategies we deploy demand rigid, unvarying execution. We are attempting to apply an entirely inflexible industrial-era assembly line system to a highly volatile, unpredictable biological environment.
The environment being our daily existence. You wake up with a mild tension headache, your morning commute takes twice as long because of an accident on the highway.
Right.
A client sends an urgent, passive-aggressive email, and suddenly that unyielding, ironclad mandate to run 5 miles after work feels less like a noble goal and more like a punitive prison sentence. The context of the day completely altered the weight of the task.
I do want to stress test that premise immediately, though. We have always been culturally conditioned to believe that rigidity breeds consistency. Discipline, historically, requires an iron will.
Sure, the whole hustle culture mindset.
Right. So if we categorize life as fluid, I wonder if we are just generating a highly sophisticated intellectual excuse for a fundamental lack of commitment. If we remove the rigid architecture from our goals, do we not destroy the very friction that is required to build mental toughness in the first place?
Well, if you examine how human neurology and physiology actually operate under severe pressure, rigidity frequently triggers systemic failure. The book uses a highly specific, concrete metaphor here regarding the fluid dynamics of a rip current in the ocean.
Okay, the riptide.
Yeah, a rip current is a narrow, powerful channel of water flowing swiftly away from the shore. If you find yourself caught in one, the immediate panic-driven instinct of the human brain is to swim directly against it, straight toward the safety of the beach. You attempt to apply brute force to overcome the environment.
And physics dictates a harsh reality in that scenario. The velocity of the water is vastly superior to human muscular endurance.
Definitely.
Swimming directly against a rip current causes rapid lactic acid buildup, cardiovascular exhaustion, and ultimately drowning. You are fighting a structural force you simply cannot defeat through sheer will.
Right, so the established survival mechanism is to swim parallel to the shore. You have to improvise. You adapt your physical trajectory to the immediate circumstances, escaping the narrow, high-pressure band of the current before you even attempt to move forward towards your goal.
Which requires letting go of the direct path.
Yeah. I have a long, heavily documented history of fighting the riptide of daily fatigue. I will attempt to muscle through a highly rigid, intense workout plan on 3 hours of sleep. I will try to outwill my own biology, and by Tuesday afternoon, I am metaphorically drowning in an ocean of guilt because my central nervous system simply refused to cooperate with my spreadsheet.
Fighting circumstances head-on with brute force gets you killed. Adaptability gets you home.
I love that framing.
This leads conceptually into the second chapter, where we have to examine what happens when we fight our own fluid nature. Guise dissects the power of freedom and the critical distinction between discipline and self-discipline.
Which are very different mechanisms.
They are. Discipline, in its purest form, is an external force. It is imposed through mechanisms of punishment and reward, usually by parents when we are children, or by managers in a corporate hierarchy.
Right.
Self-discipline, however, is internally cultivated. It requires practice, and more importantly, it requires autonomy. Guise introduces this concept of self-slavery. We artificially simulate external discipline on ourselves by raising the stakes to absurd heights and demanding absolute, unforgiving perfection.
We basically partition our own psyche into two conflicting entities. We become both the warden and the prisoner.
I'm going to push back hard on the inherent danger of this concept, though. If we do not hold our own feet to the fire through rigid, uncompromising rules, who will do it for us? Does introducing a massive influx of freedom into a goal-oriented system not simply lead to abandoning the goal entirely? I mean, if I'm not forced to perform under the threat of my own self-imposed guilt, my default biological state might just be complete inertia.
The text actually addresses this exact mechanism by examining the psychology of dieting. When individuals embark on a highly restrictive, rigid diet, they are essentially trading their essential daily freedom for the promise of short-term physical results.
Okay, the restriction model.
Yeah, they construct incredibly harsh rules regarding caloric intake, macronutrient ratios, and feeding windows. But because the human brain possesses an innate evolutionary desire for autonomy, those harsh rules inevitably trigger a psychological rebellion. The brain interprets the restriction as a threat to its agency.
So the structural restriction itself becomes the primary catalyst for the systemic failure.
Exactly. It highlights the sheer comical absurdity of acting as both the tyrannical dictator and the oppressed peasant within the borders of your own skull.
A civil war in your mind.
Right. You orchestrate these draconian Sunday afternoon meal prep rules, acting as the ruthless dictator dictating terms to the populace. Then, by Thursday evening, the oppressed peasant stages a violent, heavily weaponized snack-based revolution against the regime. You end up overthrowing your own government just to eat a sleeve of cookies.
Those who trade their freedom for short-term results will inevitably trade it back.
That is exactly how it plays out.
So to prevent that internal rebellion, the system itself must learn to bend, which brings us to the actual mechanics detailed in Chapter 3. Here, Guise breaks down the physics of elasticity and resilience. He posits that flexibility is not a compromise or a weakness, but rather the highest, most sophisticated form of strength.
Which goes against everything we're taught.
It does. In material science, a material's elastic modulus, or Young's modulus, dictates how much a substance can deform under immense physical stress and still return to its original molecular shape without fracturing. If we map this physical property onto human psychology, an elastic habit possesses multiple structural pathways to success. It can deform under the severe pressure of a chaotic day and bounce back intact.
Whereas a rigid habit, possessing a very low elastic modulus, simply snaps the moment the stress exceeds its singular tolerance level.
Is there a mathematical point, however, where flexibility devolves into fragility? If a material or a behavioral habit stretches too far, does it lose its structural integrity entirely?
What do you mean?
Well, if you continually bend the parameters of the rule every single day to accommodate your mood, surely the rule ceases to exist in any meaningful capacity.
I think the critical distinction lies in the capacity to return to the original shape, the retention of the core identity of the habit. The book contrasts two corporate models to vividly illustrate this phenomenon.
Oh, the Blockbuster example.
Yeah. Blockbuster operated on a highly rigid, unyielding business model, strictly reliant on physical brick-and-mortar stores and punitive late fees. When the market pressure violently shifted toward digital consumption, that rigid model couldn't bend. It shattered completely into bankruptcy.
Right, because it lacked elasticity.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Netflix, conversely, operated on a fluid, constantly evolving model. They transitioned from mail-order physical DVDs to digital streaming, and then directly into original content creation. Their systemic elasticity allowed them to absorb massive market pressure and reshape themselves around it.
That makes sense.
Guise also points to the biological example of Olympic gymnasts. They derive immense pound-for-pound physical strength, not from narrow, isolated muscle mass, but from full-body, dynamic flexibility. Their power is deployable in almost any physical configuration.
You contrast that functional power with a traditional bodybuilder whose rigid, hypertrophied muscle mass might actually severely limit their functional range of motion in a real-world scenario.
Looking back at my own historical attempts at habit formation, I essentially engineered them like a brittle diamond. They were incredibly impressive to look at on a spreadsheet, structurally flawless in theory, but they possess zero tensile strength. They were prone to shattering into a million sharp pieces, The absolute moment reality dropped a mild inconvenience like a delayed train or a poorly timed phone call right on top of them.
Flexibility is not weakness. It is the most powerful form of resilience against whatever threatens your progress.
Preach.
Now, how do we actively architect this elasticity into a daily routine? In Chapter 4, the structural framework gets highly specific. Guise introduces the evolution from his previous concept, mini habits, to full elastic habits.
This is where the mechanics really kick in.
The critical architectural addition here is the introduction of vertical flexibility. Previous iterations offered lateral flexibility, meaning you could execute a very small action in a few different ways, moving sideways across options. But vertical flexibility introduces 3 distinct tiered intensities of effort for the exact same habit: the mini, the plus, and the elite.
You are essentially building small, medium, and large target zones for the exact same daily objective, allowing the goal to expand or contract based on your available bandwidth.
I genuinely struggle with the underlying physiological claims here, though. Let's debate the mini level specifically. If your designated mini goal is to do exactly one single push-up, is that actually sufficient to form a physiological habit?
Okay, I see where you're going.
I question whether we are just providing ourselves with a thin layer of psychological comfort so we can avoid the emotional pain of logging a 0 on the habit tracker. A single push-up does not generate muscular hypertrophy or cardiovascular adaptation. The biological return on investment is effectively 0.
I think you are measuring the completely wrong physiological metric there.
How so?
In the foundation phase, it is not about the caloric expenditure or the immediate muscular microtears. It is entirely about the neurology. It is about the basal ganglia. Keeping that specific neural pathway active every single day, even with the absolute minimum viable physical effort, forces myelin to wrap around that neural circuit.
So it's a wiring issue, not a fitness issue.
Exactly. That daily activation is infinitely more critical for long-term behavioral rewiring than exhausting yourself to the point of nausea on a treadmill once every 2 weeks. The text cites a specific Stanford study to prove this dynamic.
Right, the goal size study.
The research demonstrates that different goal sizes possess entirely different, highly specialized motivational strengths. Small, easily attainable sub-goals are heavily relied upon by the brain for early momentum. They lower the barrier to entry. Large, complex goals are required later in the cycle for their final value and inspirational pull.
So the brain requires vastly different chemical stimuli depending on the immediate motivational landscape of the moment.
Yeah, I will readily admit to the inherent, almost theatrical absurdity of executing the mini-level, though. I have literally gone to the bedroom, put on full, specialized, moisture-wicking gym apparel, tightly laced up my proper running shoes, executed exactly one highly focused, mathematically perfect squat in the middle of the living room to claim my mini win for the day, and then immediately stripped it all off to go sit back on the couch and watch television.
Every goal size possesses a structural weakness, but functioning together, they form an interwoven team that covers every conceivable motivational situation.
It's a weird team, but it works.
This team dynamic is the intense focus of Chapter 5, exploring how these 3 specific goal sizes unlock 3 distinct psychological sweet spots. The mini level provides maximum attainability. The plus level offers respectability. The elite level taps into greatness and value.
Right.
Guise explores how this 3-tiered architecture generates compounding motivation because it operates like an autonomous navigation system, naturally filtering you into the current energy level for that specific day without conscious friction.
You no longer have to manufacture intense motivation out of thin air through sheer willpower. The system acts as a sieve, filtering your current available energy into the appropriate bucket.
But does having this plus middle ground, the respectable, comfortable option, accidentally architect an environment that encourages persistent mediocrity?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
If the human brain acts as a relentless energy conservation machine, optimizing for the lowest possible caloric expenditure, won't it simply default to the middle path every single time? It seems it would actively avoid the elite level entirely because reaching for greatness requires significantly more friction and metabolic costs.
The architecture actually prevents that degradation through the psychological mechanism of contrast. The book contrasts the specific 0-day prevention mechanism of the mini goal, which exists solely so you perform something even when you are severely ill or mentally exhausted, with the entirely non-obligatory elevated triumph of achieving an elite goal.
So the lack of obligation changes the appeal.
Yeah, because the elite goal is never forced upon you by an external mandate. Achieving it feels entirely earned rather than demanded. You naturally drift toward it on high-energy days because the dopamine reward of voluntary excellence is so incredibly potent.
That makes sense.
I deeply relate to the moderate attainability of the plus level, though. It represents the exact, precise amount of ambition I possess on a rainy Wednesday in November. It is enough effort to feel functionally productive and maintain my self-respect without triggering an existential crisis about my physical limitations.
Motivation isn't something you conjure from nothing. It is something a flexible system navigates you toward naturally.
Exactly.
And the way it navigates you relies heavily on cognitive psychology, specifically the concept of anchoring, which Guise details extensively in Chapter 6. Anchoring is a cognitive bias typically observed in retail pricing environments. You see an exorbitantly high price on one item, which immediately makes a slightly lower price seem like a highly rational, calculated bargain.
Oh, retail gets us every time with that.
They do. And Elastic Habits applies this exact cognitive glitch through a framework called two-way leverage. By formally placing the three goals side by side on your tracker, the massive elite goal acts as a heavy anchor that makes the tiny mini goal look like a massive, stress-relieving escape hatch.
Right.
Conversely, the minimal effort of the mini goal serves as a baseline anchor that makes the elite goal look incredibly impressive and heroic.
Your subconscious brain is constantly bouncing the perceived value and cost of these options off of one another in real time.
I have to question the cognitive dissonance required for self-anchoring, though. We are highly intelligent, self-aware creatures. Does this psychological trick actually continue to function when you are fully aware that you are the architect pulling the strings?
I mean, it sounds like a paradox.
It does. You consciously designed the massive elite goal specifically to make the mini goal look easier. How does the brain fall for a magic trick when it wrote the script?
Because the subconscious brain responds to environmental contrast, regardless of conscious prefrontal awareness. It is a hardwired heuristic. The text examines a highly relatable, mundane scenario, pulling weeds in a garden.
Okay.
If you establish a single floating goal that merely dictates pull one weed, your brain immediately frames that isolated task as a bothersome, irritating obligation standing between you and your weekend leisure time.
A chore.
But when that exact same identical physical task is anchored directly against the secondary option of landscape the entire backyard as the elite target, pulling that single weed suddenly feels like a delightful, almost rebellious bargain. You effectively trick your own neurology into feeling a sense of deep relief by doing the work.
It's all about framing.
It is remarkably similar to how easily I fall for the $300 decoy shirt displayed prominently at the mall. I know logically it exists entirely to justify my purchase of the $50 shirt next to it.
Correct.
Deploying this exact, transparent manipulation tactic on my own brain feels simultaneously insulting to my intellect and entirely infuriatingly effective.
Looking upward makes the small goal a relief, while looking downward makes the large goal a genuine triumph.
It's a brilliant hack.
Moving from pure psychology to systemic architecture, Chapter 7 unpacks Guise's core operating principles for the framework: intelligent tracking, life-aware methodology, and alive goals. He draws a very sharp, necessary distinction here between strategy, which is the flexible, overarching engine of victory and tactics, which constitute the daily, boots-on-the-ground execution of the tasks.
Strategy dictates how you survey and approach the battlefield. Tactics dictate how you physically swing the sword once you are in combat.
Guise extensively references Sun Tzu's ancient military treatise, The Art of War, in this section. I have to wonder if comparing the mundane act of doing a single daily push-up or drinking a glass of water to ancient, blood-soaked military strategy is a bit grandiose. We are discussing personal hygiene and light morning calisthenics, not routing an opposing army on the plains of ancient China.
Well, the scale of the conflict is vastly different, obviously. But the underlying mechanics of resource management and energy deployment are perfectly identical. The book examines the specific military concept of choosing the proper terrain.
How does that apply to habits?
A competent general does not intentionally initiate a battle in a muddy swamp if his army is already physically exhausted from a long march. He alters the terrain. If a person's physical energy is severely depleted from a stressful workday, an elastic habit allows them to change the terrain entirely.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they shift away from the intense, highly demanding terrain of a crowded, loud gym session and pivot to an active rest walk around a quiet, flat lake. You are continuously matching your available physical and mental strength to the day's specific immediate obstacles.
Right.
In retrospect, my past habit strategy was entirely devoid of any of Sun Tzu's calculations regarding terrain or energy conservation. It consisted mainly of running directly into enemy spears while screaming loudly and hoping for the best possible outcome through sheer luck.
Some days are entirely about winning the battle, but others are simply about surviving and not losing the war. Surviving the day keeps the habit alive for tomorrow.
Exactly, just stay alive.
In Chapter 8, we must confront the ramifications of choice. Guise unpacks the incredibly delicate balance between necessary stability and dynamic flexibility, openly addressing the severe neurological risks of choice paralysis and decision fatigue.
Because too many options will just crash the system.
To prevent this highly elastic system from devolving into a useless, shapeless blob of endless options, he introduces 4 strict structural pillars. You must commit to doing the habits daily. You must limit your lateral options to exactly 3. You must track your success physically. And you must firmly cap your total number of active habits at 3.
Those 4 pillars serve as the rigid, calcified bones inside the flexible, dynamic muscle of the system. Without the bones, the muscle cannot generate any directional force.
I am going to sharply question the rigidity of these 4 pillars, specifically the 3rd and 4th. Is the absolute limit of exactly 3 habits not completely arbitrary? If a designated mini-habit takes literally 10 seconds to complete, like swallowing a daily vitamin or drinking 1 glass of water, why could a highly motivated person not run 10 of them simultaneously? Why arbitrarily cap the mathematical potential for positive behavioral change?
It fundamentally comes down to cognitive load and the dangerous dilution of mental focus. Even a minuscule 10-second habit requires a surprising amount of mental bandwidth.
Just to manage it.
Yeah, you have to consciously remember it, you have to track it, and you have to continuously allocate background cognitive space to managing it. The text uses the biomechanical metaphor of a superjoint to explain this necessary balance. The system absolutely requires the powerful, multidirectional mobility of a shoulder joint, which has an incredible range of motion.
But the shoulder is notoriously unstable.
Exactly. So that mobility absolutely must be paired with the low-energy, highly structured, restrictive stability of a hip joint. Without the strict structural cap of 3 habits, you inevitably encounter the 47 ketchup paradox.
Right, the grocery store issue.
If you stand in a grocery aisle faced with 47 slightly different varieties of ketchup, or you are faced with too many daily habit options, severe choice paralysis sets in. The prefrontal cortex simply shuts down the selection process.
You just walk away without any ketchup.
I can offer a brutally honest, highly personal anecdote regarding the reality of decision fatigue. I regularly lose up to 45 minutes of my precious limited evening time simply scrolling through the endless grid, trying to decide what to watch on Netflix. By the time I finally make a selection, my brain is too exhausted to actually process the plot, and I fall asleep.
That perfectly proves exactly why daily goals cannot possess more than 3 structural variations. The brain exhausts its finite energy reserves merely engaging in the selection process.
It really does.
Variability of result keeps the brain engaged, but stability of structure keeps the execution on track. This theoretical structure becomes highly actionable and practical in Chapter 9, where Guise outlines the mechanics of elastic habits in 7 easy steps.
It's a grid.
Yes, he walks the reader meticulously through creating a physical 3x3x3 grid. That translates to 3 core habits, 3 lateral options for each of those habits, and 3 vertical intensity targets for each of those options. He strongly advocates for a universal daily cue, meaning you have permission to complete the habit at literally any time before your head hits the pillow, rather than tying the habit to strict time-specific cues like 7:00 a.m.
Right.
He also heavily emphasizes the absolute non-negotiable necessity of visual tracking measured in 15-day periods.
The 15-day tracking period is a crucial psychological interval. A standard 7-day week feels too short to observe a meaningful behavioral trend, and a full 30-day month feels agonizingly long to wait for any sense of completion or reward. 15 days hits the exact sweet spot of sustained effort and timely psychological payoff.
Let us examine the no-cue daily setup critically. Is giving yourself until the absolute end of the day actually an effective strategy? In behavioral psychology, giving yourself until bedtime to complete a non-urgent task frequently leads to chronic procrastination, followed by a highly panicked, adrenaline-fueled scramble at 11:55 p.m.
Well, the midnight scramble.
Without a specific time anchor to trigger the behavior, the task floats infinitely in the background of your mind, causing low-level anxiety all day.
The entire system is explicitly designed to anticipate and absorb that exact late-night scramble, which is precisely why the mini option exists. The book details a specific scenario regarding a violin habit as a primary example.
How does that map out?
The broad general habit of play violin stretches laterally into three distinct separate pathways. You can practice scales, study music theory, or play full songs. It then stretches vertically into the mini, plus, and elite timeframes. You track this multidimensional progress physically with colored stickers. I will freely and openly admit to being the exact person executing frantic midnight mini habits in the dark. I have stood in my kitchen at 11:58 p.m., quietly studying a single sheet of music theory for exactly 60 seconds, just so I can legitimately slap a green sticker on my physical calendar before the clock strikes midnight.
So you did succumb to the procrastination.
I did, which entirely proves your point about the dangers of procrastination, but it simultaneously proves that the system undeniably works, because the physical streak remains unbroken and the neural pathway is activated.
A habit that lives entirely in your head is easily rationalized away by a tired brain. Making it physical and visible in the real world makes it inescapable.
Stickers don't lie.
Building on this sturdy foundation, Chapter 10 explores the realm of advanced strategies and tactics. Guise introduces highly nuanced concepts like modular habits, where you sequentially stack different behaviors together.
Right.
Interchangeable habits, which utilize a communal pool of equal effort actions, elastic routines, intensive sprints, and the fascinating concept of reverse exceptions.
This section operates essentially as an expansion pack for the core operating system, designed strictly for deployment once you have achieved baseline mastery and consistency over a period of months.
The psychological concept of the reverse exception is particularly intriguing to analyze. The standard human operating procedure is to say, just this once, as an exception, I'll eat a massive donut because it's Friday. A reverse exception flips that script entirely, forcing you to say, just this once, as an exception, I'll drink a glass of water instead of my usual afternoon soda.
It's a total inversion.
But does executing a reverse exception actually rewire the brain's deeply entrenched default behavior over a long timeline? Or is it merely a cute, superficial psychological gimmick that immediately evaporates the moment you are subjected to real environmental stress?
I think it acts as a highly effective pattern interrupt. It briefly, sharply destabilizes a negative default behavior, creating a tiny window of neuroplasticity. Let us look at the modular kitchen cleaning habit outlined in the text as a highly concrete application of these advanced tactics.
The stacking behavior.
Yeah, it operates sequentially, building on its own momentum. The mini level is strictly defined as washing the dishes in the sink. The plus level activates only when you add wiping down all the counters. The elite level activates when you add sweeping and mopping the floor.
So the completion of one triggers the next.
The architecture here relies entirely on physical momentum, carrying the user from one tier to the next. Once your hands are already wet and soapy from washing the dishes, the activation energy required to simply wipe the counters is significantly reduced. You are already in motion.
That makes practical sense.
Returning to the concept of exceptions, I've recently observed with horrifying clarity that my entire adult life is currently built on a crumbling foundation of standard exceptions. I constantly tell myself, just this once, I'll order expensive takeout because I had a uniquely hard day.
We all do that.
Implementing a reverse exception into my routine feels less like a habit tweak and more like a hostile corporate takeover of my own established comfort-seeking personality. It violently forces the brain to utilize its highly evolved excuse-making machinery to generate a positive, healthy outcome.
Exceptions eventually inevitably become the new rules. The trick is meticulously ensuring they are the right kind of exceptions.
Precisely.
The long-term, multi-year maintenance of these rules is the intense focus of Chapter 11, titled How to Succeed Every Day with Elastic Habits. Guise heavily emphasizes that the mini day, a specific day where you achieve absolutely nothing more than the lowest possible tier for all your active habits, is the absolute load-bearing linchpin of the entire systemic architecture.
It's the safety net.
He explores three distinct chronological phases of habit formation: building a foundation, achieving stability and refinement, and ultimately reaching mastery. The system's true brilliance lies in allowing users to be both highly reactive and protective on a terrible day and aggressively proactive on an excellent one.
It entirely removes the toxic, debilitating shame usually associated with a low-output, exhausted day. It reclassifies survival as a victory.
However, does fully embracing the concept of the all-mini day run the significant risk of breeding long-term systemic complacency? If you can technically, legally claim a win on your tracker by doing a combined total of 5 minutes of work across 3 different habits, doesn't that permanently stall your progress in the foundation phase?
It sounds like it could.
A user could theoretically spend 3 years just doing the bare minimum and happily calling it success, never actually achieving any meaningful transformation.
That skeptical perspective assumes that human beings completely lack an innate biological drive for progression and excellence, which the elite options are explicitly designed to trigger. We want to be good at things.
So the ambition takes over eventually.
Right. The book recounts Guise's highly illustrative rain run story to demonstrate this innate drive. He set out on a run, aiming strictly for a moderate plus win. Halfway through, he felt a surge of physical energy, so he consciously decided to extend the distance to capture an elite win.
Okay.
Just as he made that internal commitment, a massive freezing downpour started. Under a standard, rigid system, that freezing rain serves as the perfect, justifiable excuse to quit and walk home. But because he was actively chasing an earned, highly valued elite win that he had chosen for himself, he reframed the rain.
He saw it as a challenge.
Exactly. He turned it into an epic obstacle to defeat rather than a convenient excuse to quit. He ran through the storm, driven by the lure of the elite tier. I do have to express a deep, almost spiritual reverence for the concept of the all-mini day, though. The ability to achieve 100% daily, fully documented victory across all my life goals in under 5 minutes. The absolute ultimate guilt-free productivity hack.
It perfectly preserves the psychological streak without draining your reserves.
It's beautiful.
The A+ in this flexible system is not achieving the elite level. The A+ is simply the act of showing up every single day, regardless of the output.
Just show up.
This brings us seamlessly to the concluding philosophical arguments presented in Chapter 12. Guise summarizes the overarching, unified philosophy of the framework. Ultimate, enduring strength requires profound empowerment through freedom.
Right.
By ingeniously combining 9 separate, distinct win conditions per habit with a tactile physical tracking system, the user actively regains absolute command over the volatile battlefield of their daily life.
You transition psychologically from being a helpless, passive victim of your unpredictable schedule to becoming an active, strategic commander of your own responses to that schedule.
Yeah. There is one final critical question to pose regarding this entire framework before we conclude our analysis. When does the executed habit become so deeply neurologically ingrained in your basal ganglia that you no longer require the physical stickers, the elaborate tracking calendars, or the elastic system itself? Does the attainment of true unconscious mastery eventually mean outgrowing the elastic framework entirely, discarding the scaffolding once the building is complete?
I think the physical act of tracking might eventually fade away as the behavior becomes automatic, but the underlying elastic mindset remains permanently installed. The book ends by reflecting on a profoundly relevant, famous quote from Bruce Lee.
The martial artist quote.
Yeah, he observed that the stiffest, most rigid tree is always the one that cracks and falls in the violent storm, while the flexible bamboo survives the identical storm by yielding and bending with the wind. The entire framework is designed to teach you how to become the bamboo. Personally, I am fully prepared and entirely willing to become the bamboo, mostly because bending over in the wind requires significantly less physical and mental effort than standing rigidly straight and fighting a hurricane.
Give your habits the power of elasticity, and you will never be forced to go back to the brittle, easily shattered targets of the past. Let me leave you with one final thought to mull over. If this principle of elasticity is the ultimate cure for individual burnout, what would happen if we applied this exact same 3x3 framework to the rigid expectations we place on our relationships, our parenting, or the teams we manage at work? Could an elastic team survive the storms that break rigid corporations?
That's a whole other deep dive right there.
All right, let's get to the part of the show where we break down the words.
I will say I desperately needed to deep dive on the word attainability, primarily because my current life goals belong entirely in the science fiction section of the library, right next to the time travel novels.
It is a critical concept for grounding those goals. Let us start with our first word, fluid. In this context, it is an adjective defined as constantly changing, shifting, and adapting to external forces. It represents a dynamic state that is not fixed in place.
We connected this word directly to the book's foundational premise regarding our highly unpredictable daily schedules. The text uses it to describe how our physical energy and available time shift continuously, much like water flowing through a container.
Which is a great visualization.
It is. And it is worth noting the specific register here. Calling a situation or a schedule fluid has a much more neutral, professional, or even positive connotation compared to calling it unstable, which sounds like an impending crisis that requires immediate intervention.
Exactly. A fluid situation is manageable, an unstable one is dangerous. Our second word is the direct structural opposite, rigid. This is an adjective defined as stiff, inflexible, and entirely unwilling or unable to yield or change shape under pressure.
We discussed this concept extensively in relation to Blockbuster's failed, unyielding business model and those standard, unforgiving 30-day fitness challenges that demand absolute perfection.
Right.
In modern productivity literature and systems design, rigid carries a heavily negative connotation. It implies a critical, often fatal failure to adapt to the reality of a changing environment.
Word number 3 is improvise. It is a verb meaning to spontaneously create, perform, or adapt a plan in real time without any prior preparation or script.
This tied beautifully into that excellent, highly visual riptide metaphor. When you are suddenly caught in the overwhelming current, you cannot rely on the brute force of your original rigid plan to swim to the beach. You have to rapidly improvise and swim parallel to the shore.
Right, abandoning the original plan.
Yeah, it carries a very strong positive connotation of resourcefulness, quick intelligence, and adaptability under pressure.
Our fourth word is the title concept of the entire framework, elastic. As an adjective, it describes the precise physical ability of a material to stretch significantly under intense pressure and then successfully return to its original shape without sustaining permanent damage.
The core thesis of the entire book relies entirely on this single word. A properly constructed habit should shrink down to its smallest form on your worst, most exhausted days and expand to its largest form on your best, most energetic days, successfully absorbing the unpredictable pressure of your life without ever snapping.
Word 5 is the one you mentioned needing, attainability. This is a noun defined as the specific quality of being achievable, or more accurately in this context, how realistic and accessible a goal actually feels to the person attempting to pursue it.
This is the entire psychological engine operating behind the mini-habit sweet spot. If a daily goal lacks immediate attainability, your motivation dies immediately upon waking up. It is a slightly formal register, highly useful when discussing corporate strategy, behavioral coaching, or complex system architecture.
Number 6 is anchor. In this psychological context, we use it as a noun, a fixed, highly visible reference point that heavily influences and distorts how we evaluate and perceive the value of other things around it.
We saw this clearly with the two-way leverage system. The looming presence of the massive, highly demanding elite goal acts as a psychological anchor that tricks the brain, making the tiny mini goal look incredibly easy and deeply relieving by direct comparison.
Word 7 is a crucial, heavily researched psychological term. Decision fatigue. It is a noun phrase defining the steady, measurable deterioration of a person's choice quality and mental bandwidth after making successive, continuous decisions over a sustained period of time.
This phenomenon is exactly why the system strictly caps the lateral options at 3. It intentionally prevents the 47 ketchup paradox we discussed.
Right, the grocery store issue.
Exactly. If you have to constantly make too many micro choices about how to execute your habit, your brain completely exhausts its glucose reserves before you even begin the physical execution of the task.
Finally, word 8 is lateral. It is an adjective relating to the side, or in the context of strategy, exploring different equal pathways that exist at the exact same horizontal level of a hierarchy.
We contrasted this directly with vertical flexibility. Lateral flexibility means choosing between going for a walk, doing push-ups, or going to the gym to successfully satisfy your daily exercise habit. You are moving sideways across different physical options, not moving up and down in the intensity or duration of the effort.
Keep reading, keep growing, and we'll see you in the next one.
I'm off to do exactly one push-up and officially declare myself an elite athlete. Goodbye.